You know, I've been thinking about the following recently. We spent months, sometimes years, getting to go live on a Salesforce project. And all the effort goes into the design, into the build, into testing, fixing things last minute. And then we hit go live. And there's this moment when everybody kind of like exhales, like, we made it. But here's the thought been sitting with me. What if at that moment, it actually where things start to go maybe slightly wrong? Not immediately and not in an obvious way, but quietly over the first few weeks. Because if I'm honest, I don't think most Salesforce projects are decided at that go live point. They're decided in the first 30 days after go live. And most projects don't treat those 30 days with anywhere near enough attention. I've seen it a lot. You get to go live and there's a bit or maybe even a big celebration. People are relieved, stakeholders are happy, and the pressure will drop. And so naturally, attention starts to shift somewhere else, maybe onto the next phase, the next little bit, to our famous backlog, maybe onto another project completely, or maybe just we go back to normal business. And on paper, everything looks fine. The system is live, users being trained, processes are in place, but underneath all of that, something is happening. Because now for the first time, real users are interacting with the system in the actual day-to-day work. Not in a training room, not in a sandbox, not following that perfect script, just trying to get through their day, and that is where things change. If you start to slow it down, those first 30 days are actually incredibly predictable. Not in a technical sense, but in a human sense. So let's look at that a little bit deeper. Now, that first week is always messy. People are clicking around, they're still unsure, they're asking the person next to them instead of looking at training materials, or they go to the super users, and you start to hear things like, where did I put this again? Why is this field here? Am I doing this right? And at this stage, people are forming their first impression, not of Salesforce as a platform, but of their experience using it. Is it helping me, or is it slowing me down? And they decide that incredibly quickly. You see to start a quiet shift. It's where it gets subtle. Something doesn't quite work. People are not going to stop and raise a ticket, and they don't write a long piece of feedback. They just adjust. They start keeping notes somewhere else, maybe skip certain steps. They start to find ways around things. And from their perspective, they're just being efficient. By the third week, people have settled. Not necessarily in the right way of working, but in their way of working. And that's the moment that often gets missed, because everything will look calm. Fewer questions, fewer obvious issues. And that's not because everything is working perfectly. It's because people have just stopped trying to figure it out. They've just decided, this is how I'm going to use the system. And then by the fourth week, you start to hear things like little comments. It's a bit clunky. It's slowing me down a little bit. I still prefer the old way for some of the things we did before. And once that starts, that kind of narrative spreads like wildfire. Because people trust each other's experience more than they trust any training or messaging. And so all of a sudden, you don't just have a system, you have a perception problem. And the thing is, that isn't because people are doing things wrong. It's not because the business doesn't care. It's because how we structure projects. Everything is geared towards that one big go live moment. That's the milestone. That's where the pressure sits. That's where success is measured. So naturally, once you hit that point, your energy will drop, focus will shift, budgets will tighten. And training is often seen as, well, that's done. But then there's the gap. Because training before go live is just an introduction. Real understanding only starts when people are using the system for real on a day-to-day basis. And there's always a gap between, oh, I remember I saw that in training and I can actually use it when I'm under pressure. And that gap will show up incredibly fast. Because the challenge is within training, most of the time, everything is clean. The data is as perfect as possible. Scenarios are very strictly controlled. But there is some time to think. But in reality, people are juggling things. They're interrupted. The phone rings, a colleague pops up. They're dealing with incomplete information. And they're under pressure to move quickly. We have to hit our targets. We have to hit our goals. So when something doesn't feel intuitive, they fall back on what feels easy. And if that means stepping outside of the system, that's what they will do. So what would good look like? So companies that have explored, identified, and defined good, They don't treat go live as the end. They treat it as the start of the real work. And more importantly, they plan for those first 30 days. Not technically, but behaviorally. They stay close to the users. They make support visible, really visible, not hidden behind processes, but easy, human, accessible. Think floor walking, drop-in session, team meeting engagement. They will listen clearly, early, and attentively. Not through surveys 3 months later, but in real conversations. What's frustrating? What's unclear? What are you avoiding? And the business will then act quickly. They will make small adjustments, clarifications, quick follow-ups before the habits are going to settle in. And this is where training changes shape. It's no longer, a long session, a big deck, a delivery. It should become something like ongoing guidance, small nudges, quick corrections, reinforcement in that moment. And that is why I think training is often misunderstood. Because in those first 30 days, training isn't about teaching people what the system does. It is about helping them figure out, how do I make this work for me? And that's a kind of different role. It's more observational, more adaptive, more human. You're watching how people actually use the system and helping them bridge that gap between intention and reality. So going back to that initial thought, what if your project wasn't designed on go live, but in the first 30 days after that? Because when you look at it that way, things start to make sense. Because that is when habits form, perceptions settle, and workarounds appear. And once those are in place, you're no longer guiding behavior, you're trying to change it. And that's a completely different challenge. So maybe the shift should be this. Don't celebrate go live as the finish line. Recognize as the moment when things become real. And then ask yourself, what are we doing in the first 30 days after this? Because that answer probably tells you everything about how the project will turn out. It sounds like a ridiculous simple idea, but if you get this right, it will change your adoption, how sales will run into your organization.